Oké, is goed. So I see 5 of you have tuned in. Welcome to this session. It's 1:11, so we're waiting for a couple of minutes before we get started with our presentation. But welcome. You're welcome to also share your camera if you want to, so we can see you, or you can also choose to not do that and participate via the chat. During the presentation, I will moderate the chat, so feel free to ask any questions on the chat, or either share your microphone and ask them to us with your voice, but either of those is okay. Good morning, Philip. Okay, so I see a lot of you have joined us. Welcome. Good morning today. Mirko and I will start the session soon. You can all see the slides on the bottom of the screen. I apologize for the letters, they're a little bit small, but most of the slides will be just pictures mainly, so I think that will be okay. Okay, Mirko, I think we can start.
Okay, let's do that. Good morning. My name is Mirko Tobias Schäfer. I'm an associate professor at Utrecht University, and I'm here together with Iris Muis, who's a project manager at the Utrecht DETA School. We are going to speak about how to make data practices accountable and how to review any data project you're going to start at your municipality with an eye to public values that might be either carried by the data project or transformed by the data project. So without further ado, who are we? We are from the Utrecht DETA School. Utrecht DETA School is a research and teaching platform at Utrecht University. And we are mostly concerned with either applying data practices, so we do data analysis as part of our research. Our team helps municipalities, other government organizations, companies and NGOs to struggle through their data issues. And it's a very explorative way of research, which gives us a lot of insight into the various data practices that are being developed and are around. Most often we actually give advice on data ethical issues, and that is very much related to our basic research questions. We are interested in how do datafication, data practices, models and algorithms, how do they affect citizenship and democracy? So we speak a lot with people in the field. We do our research not in the ivory tower. We go to the municipalities and speak to them. And here's a small anecdote. One of the information advisor of a mid-sized Dutch municipality said one day, he said, Mirko, you know what I want? Actually, I want a little device that sits on my desk in my office, as sort of a data Alexa, if you want. And Data Alexa knows everything about our community and our budget. So I can ask at the end of a term, I can ask Alexa, hey, how much money do we have left and what should we do with it? And then Alexa would do the crunching of the numbers and come back with the idea that there must be a playground in one neighborhood, or there should trees be planted in another neighborhood, and so forth. So what we see here is a really interesting approach to data, namely a very instrumental one. So this data Alexa seems to be unbiased, seems to have access to all the necessary data, and the data seem to represent appropriately the entire community and all the different demographics. And we know, of course, that the reality is rather different. So just to jump right into correcting the expectations that we have into data, we need to emphasize that data are not neutral and they are not the new oil either. just to give you one brief example how confused it could get with data is this rather legendary Excellegate, which comes from two renowned economic scholars, Weinert and Rogoff, who published their paper, Growth in a Time of Debt, in 2013. What they wanted to do was to find whether there's a correlation between national debt and the gross domestic product. And they had the idea that, and that was what their numbers found, that once the debt exceeds 60% of the gross domestic product, there is a decline of 2% per year in economic growth. And if it surpasses 90% of the gross domestic product, there is a steep decline in economic development. However, they forgot to calculate into their final calculations an entire column which was not attached to their formula in the spreadsheet, which is rather a bummer here, because this column shows also countries who showed economic progress in times of national debt. So their hypothesis of the correlation, the hypothesis of the percentage was immediately off the table, and even the hypothesis between a correlation between gross domestic product and national debt and economic growth was up for debate. Let's look at another example. We can see data visualizations. This is a sort of a dashboard. It's the barometer, a sort of life quality index that is used by the Ministry for Inner Affairs to indicate how the living quality is in any given zip code in the Netherlands. I indicated here the area in Rotterdam where I lived for 5 years very happily. But as you can see, it ranks an insufficient on the scoreboard here, indicated here. Dark green is outstanding, is excellent. I'm living in such a neighborhood now, but I have to say, once I was living there, I was very happy there too. So as this is a public model, we can actually look in the indicators and how they're weighed. We can look at the back end of this visualization, which looks very much, persuasive and objective in a way. And then you can see that indicators might be the public transport system, how many supermarkets are nearby, are there any things for children like playgrounds, daycare, safety aspects are calculated in, and for approximately 25%, the demographics are calculated. And there's one point that we found rather troubling, that the more people with a non-Western migration background, niet-Westerse allochtonen, as it's called in Dutch, are living in any given neighborhood, it affects negatively the life quality index. So the assumption of the model is the more non-Western, the more people with a non-Western migratory background are living in a neighborhood, the more the life quality declines. Which is just an assumption. It is not based into the empirical reality of the people actually living there. This should make us aware that any statistical analysis uses assumptions and models and is based in data. All three we actually have to question. We have to look at the model, we have to look at the assumptions that are embedded into the model, we have to look at the data that are representing the various demographics. And then there are values. Values can be carried by a data project or an algorithm. And the example we refer to most likely in the past month is the system risk indication developed by the Dutch government to trace fraud, whether it be tax evasion or social benefits fraud. In this case, it's social benefit fraud. So while no one can actually object against an algorithm that traces fraud, we can well object against the way the algorithm defines fraud and the way the algorithm is actually deployed. So as to the definition, Siri seems rather to look for a stereotype of fraudster rather for indicators of fraud. And as for deployment, Siri is indiscriminately used on entire neighborhoods that show social economic decline, or what the Dutch call achterstandswijken. So how are values affected here? Values are affected in Firstly, explicitly in the design, we want to combat fraud. We want to prevent that our public funds are misused. Nobody can disagree with that. But then we see there's another value that is carried by the algorithm. And that value is rather touching upon our basic understanding of our judicial system, namely that you're innocent until proven guilty. And theory turns that around and makes it you're guilty by suspicion, and most likely because you're living in a poor neighborhood. So in that case, theory as an algorithm can actually undermine our understanding of our judicial system and our open society. And then there's another point to these algorithms. It's not only theory. These social benefit fraud algorithms were rather popular. Municipalities thought for a while that it's lucrative to find people that are cheating on their social benefits, rather than maybe looking where could we actually gain more income, not where do we lose money to people who are not eligible to the social benefits, but maybe people who evade taxes or use other ways of taking money inactively out public funds. The thing that we also find concerning is the question of the effectiveness of the algorithm. So we see here an example of an algorithm used in Oriones Walcheren, where a risk population had been formed out of the total population. So an entire group was screened for potential social benefit fraud, and the algorithm said that 22 possible cases, that is the risk population. And out of this risk population, less than 50% actually proved to be problematic cases. So this is not a really effective algorithm that forces you to target a large population to get a risk population, and only 50% of that risk population might actually be fraudulent. So to sum this up, before we go into the more active session about thinking how to actually review a data project, data are not neutral and values are represented by data practice. So we have to question which values are represented here and which values might be breached or transformed. And all data projects might be inherently political. So a project for predicting poverty in a more social democratic municipality might look very different from one in a more liberal municipality. And after a while, you have, of course, a new council, which might represent different values, and you have to revisit your old algorithms. So how can we do that if this is really a complex network, as you can see here? It touches upon issues of privacy, accessibility, trust, the notion of a good life, and informed consent. We would recommend impact assessments that help the designers of data projects and the users of algorithms to actually look for the representativity of their data and to see to what extent vulnerable demographics might be targeted and might be on the other side of the algorithm. How does it affect stakeholders? And largely, of course, how does it affect society?
Yes.
So I hand it now over to my colleague Iris, who tells you more about the data ethics decision aid.
Yes, thank you. So we saw a lot of opportunities with data, but also some pitfalls. So how do we mitigate these pitfalls? It's by thinking about ethics, it's by thinking about how do we actually represent and integrate our values into our data projects, into our algorithms, into our AI. So we came up with a tool, which is the Data Ethics Decision Aid, or DETA in short. I will refer to it as DETA from now on. And we came up with it for two reasons. So the first one is that we were doing a lot of data projects ourselves, a lot of data research with our students who might not have prior knowledge of how to conduct data research who might not have prior knowledge of how to ethically conduct data research. So we really needed an ethical framework for ourselves, for our own research with our PhDs, with our researchers, with our students. And the second reason is that the municipality of Utrecht in 2016 came to us and asked us, okay, we need an ethical framework for our data projects as well. Because at the time they were really one of the municipalities who were at the forefront of doing more data-driven public management. So, and the GDPR was not in effect at all in 2016. So there really was nationally, but also internationally, a lack of ethical guidelines for doing data research. Of course, there were a lot of medical ethical guidelines, but they were not suitable at all for big data projects because they were, talking about DNA samples, blood samples, testing persons, and all of those things are not really applicable when you're doing big data research. So this is what the tool looks like now, the DETA. It's kind of hard to see, but I invite all of you to go to our website and download it yourself because it's openly accessible and downloadable as a PDF file. Mirko actually put our link in the chat box, so I invite all of you to download it and see for yourself because these letters are not readable on the screen right now, but it's just to give you an impression of the shape. So it has the shape of a sort of game. It's this spiral, and you start at the right-hand corner. First, oh yeah, I should mention it's explicitly a group process. So groups come together, they sit around this big DETA poster. It has the format of, or the size of A0, so it's really a big poster. You put it on the table and the data project team comes together, sits around this poster and talks about ethical pitfalls of their data projects. They start by answering some general questions about their project. You know, what kind of data are you planning to use? Can you already think of some benefits or maybe downsides of the projects? Which stakeholders are involved in the project, just to get on the same page of, what are we talking about? Then they continue with, it's hard to see, but with the blue questions on top of the poster, which are the more like data or technical related questions. So those are questions like, what algorithm are you using? What type of algorithm? Is there someone in the team who can explain how this algorithm works? Or did you get it from a third party and is it really a black box and you don't really know what happens inside of it? But also, who has access to the data? Is this access monitored? How are you planning on visualizing the results of your project, etc.? So then you get to the green questions, which is the bottom part of the spiral. And those are the more general considerations that have to do with privacy, with transparency, communication, bias, all of those things that you typically associate with ethics. So the group goes through these questions, they talk about them, and the most important thing is that they decide on what they want to do with their own project. You know, what direction do we want to take this project in? So they actually make decisions as they go and they write them down. So they document their ethical deliberation on the project. And this documentation is very important also in light of the GDPR, which requires your ethical decisions to be heavily documented. And if they're not documented, they won't accept it. So this documentation is very important and it proves to be very helpful when your project is under review at an ethical commission, for example, or when a journalist comes to your municipality and starts asking questions about how you decided some aspects of your data projects. So this documentation is a very important part of this framework. In the middle of the poster, that's the final step of the process, and that's the step in which the team kind of goes back to their values, their organizational values. So they talk about what values do we as an organization deem to be important, and does our project represent these values or not? So this is also what Mirko was talking about in the beginning. What values are represented by our data projects, and are these actually in line with our organizational values? So that's how the process works. It takes, when you do it for the first time, it takes 3 hours approximately, which is a long time, but it's really the time that's needed to ethically reflect, deliberate, and document your decisions in this process. So it is a face-to-face process, but obviously in light of the current situation, we have created a remote version, which you will see on the screen now. A remote version can be used by teams in an online meeting environment like WebEx, Teams, Zoom, you name it. So it is an interactive PDF file. This is the Dutch version you see on the screen right now. The English version is in the making. It will be out soon, but we started out with a Dutch version, which has been extensively tested already and has already been used by numerous municipalities. The format is the same, the process is the same. It just allows groups to have this ethical deliberation remotely. Okay, so Mirko, I kindly ask you to click to the next. Oh, okay, so these letters are not readable at all. I apologize, but what I wanted to tell you here is what are the concrete results when you use the DETA tool. So the first concrete result is that it is a documentation of your ethical decisions within your data projects. Oh, Philip gives a very nice tip in the comments. Just double click on the screen share to enlarge the slide so you can actually read the letters. Thanks, Philip. The second concrete result of when you use the DETA is a list of action points. So some questions on the poster not be answerable directly. You know, some things might not be clear, so you make an action point out of it. So you say, okay, this team member, for instance, the privacy officer, can you please find out for us which rules and regulations apply to this project and report back to us during our next team meeting? So you have a list of those action points which you can follow up as a team directly after. The third concrete result is an increase in data ethical awareness. So what questions actually matter when you're doing data projects? You know, typically people only think of privacy, but ethics is a lot just privacy. Of course, privacy is very important, but things like transparency, communication, bias, those things all matter. And this tool really teaches teams to ask critical questions and deliberate with each other. So some of you might ask, okay, but we have a DETA, Data Protection Impact Assessment. We have a tool already. So why do we need this? And I will say to you, that's a very good question. Actually, the DETA is mandatory according to the GDPR when you're using personal data within your data projects. And it is an individual process. So typically the privacy officer or the FG will use the DETA to really evaluate risks and if it's necessary to mitigate risks. The DETA is a different tool, but it can definitely complement each other. So DETA is explicitly a group process, so it's focused on project groups, and it's not mandatory. And it can also be used in data projects that don't use personal data. So it's typically used in projects where certain values are pitted against each other, or you suspect there to be some ethical considerations. That's when you use DETA. But those processes, DEPIA and DETA, really complement each other. So we have had a lot of feedback from privacy officers, from FG's, that actually when a team has already done a DETA, it really helps them to fill out the DEPIA. It really makes the process a lot easier, and vice versa. So when the DEPIA is done, it gives a lot of input for the DETA, and the DETA can be done faster. So that's a little bit about the difference between the DEPIA and the DETA. This is what it looks like to be doing DETA in groups, face to face. So you see the project team here sitting around the poster, deliberating with each other. And you know, the group composition is very important. So what you want is there to be a lot of people from different backgrounds, because they all have something to bring to the table. You wanted a deliberation, ethical deliberation, that's as complete as possible. So you really need people from different backgrounds to really get that multidisciplinary approach. So on the slide here, I've tried to visualize this. You see the project lead, who obviously needs to be there. You see a data analyst who can answer a lot of the more data related technical questions on the tool. You see a privacy officer or FG who can answer all of the legal questions. A domain expert, which is really, really important, because he or she can really give insight into, you know, when we decide this, it will mean this in practice. So he or she can really give insight into the practical implications of decisions made. A communication advisor can be very helpful, because communication is a big part of ethical data projects. A policy officer, of course, and lastly, we also advise there to be some kind of political officers. So here I've put elder woman on the slide. It really helps the process if there's someone who can make political decisions, because as Mirko said before, a data project can have inherently political aspects embedded within them. Yeah, so these are all of the parties which make use of DETA already. So more than 30 municipalities make use of DETA, some more extensively than others. So for instance, the municipality of Zaanstad made the DETA mandatory for all of their data projects which have a predictable aspect in them. So all data projects which try to predict something in the future. Municipality of Utrecht also made an ethical impact assessment mandatory within their data projects, and they can, or they have the option to use DETA for that. 3 ministries make use of DETA. For instance, the Ministry of General Affairs. Verdonk, Klooster and Associates make use of DETA, which is a consultancy firm which works mainly within public management. Vereniging Nederlandse Gemeenten, Municipal Association in the Netherlands, makes use of DETA, not only within their data awareness activities, but also within their other projects. DETA is a structural aspect within the, or topic within the Police Academy and also within the Rijksacademie voor Financiën. So this is just a short overview of the main parties which are using DETA, but a lot of other parties are using DETA which we don't even know about, because you can just download it for free and use it on your own. So sometimes we find out that an organization has been using DETA for 3 years and we had no idea. So that's always fun. Okay. What's next? Yeah.
Iris.
Let's go to the case. Yeah.
So put it into action.
Yeah. So we've given you an oversight of why data ethics is important. We introduced the data ethics decision aid. So now we would like to show you how you could actually implement it yourself. We've chosen an example case to really make it concrete and to show you, like I said, how you can use this yourself. So this case is, I think most of you know this type of project. It's about early school leavers. So some municipalities in the Netherlands deal with early school leavers. Young people that leave school without a diploma or a degree and before having reached the age of 18. So of course, as a society, you want to minimize the number of early school leavers because it has a lot of negative consequences on your society. The municipality decided to do something about this, namely to predict which children have a high risk of leaving the school early. So for this, they created a data project. They included several data sources, for instance, grades, which they got from the school, absence numbers, which they also got from the school, demographic and socioeconomic data on inhabitants, on families. So for instance, the income of the parents, but also if the parents are divorced, if the child has an older brother or sister who might have already left school early. They included data on mental health. They asked the police for data on involvement with police, and they also used some of their own data on, for instance, social benefits. So is the family receiving any social benefits? So with this, they created a nice algorithm. And the output of the algorithm was a list of people, young children, that had a high risk of leaving the school early. So with this, they could implement certain measures, like for instance, go to the family of the child, talk to the family, or include the child's mentor or teacher to talk to the child directly, or offer some extracurricular courses, for instance. Okay, so this is a project. We're now going to look into some questions of the DETA tool and see how they could be applied to this project. So one of the topics we want to discuss with you is access. So who has access to the data and under what conditions? Of course, the data that's used is very sensitive because not only is it about children under the age of 18, so minors, but also it includes some very sensitive data like data on mental health, for instance. So it's very important that access to this data is restricted and is closely monitored.
Well, even think of just the fact that it is constituting a risk population of people who are not performing well in school makes the data set peculiar. Imagine an HR recruiter who is also eager to develop an algorithm and might think, oh, let's import all the risk populations of the early school leaver algorithms in the Netherlands because maybe there's a correlation with future poor job performance. That might actually stigmatize these persons for decades to come.
yeah, so stigmatization is a topic that comes up here also. Yeah, definitely. So the next topic we want to shine extra light on is communication. So what's actually the communication strategy with regard to this project? Are you going to organize an information evening or session at the school for all of the parents? Or are you going to send letters to all of the parents whose kids' data is included? Or are you not going to communicate about this at all? Or maybe do some like passive communication. So put up a statement, a short statement on your website that can only be found by people who are actually looking for it. This is a very, very important aspect, and we see that a lot of times with data projects, this step is forgotten. People don't think about their communication strategy, or they just think, okay, leave it to the communication advisor, he or she will fix it. If a parent comes to us with a difficult question, they can solve it. But yeah, we often see that a lot of problems arise when you don't think about your communication strategy well in advance. And are all parties involved in agreement as to this strategy? You know, with a large multi-stakeholder projects like this one, where the police is involved, the schools are involved, the municipality is involved, you have to be in agreement as to what you're communicating to the public. And who's responsible for creating these strategies? So are you just gonna give a short brief to an external communication advisor who has not been involved in the project at all? Or are you going to really include a communication advisor from the beginning, so he or she is really up to date on exactly how the project works? And the last part of the DETA that we want to shine extra light on, obviously there are a lot of aspects in the DETA, but it will take way too much time to go over them all. So we've chosen this one, bias, which is, in my opinion, very important within this specific data project. So the first question is there any part of the project that you consider problematic? If so, discuss your concern with your team members. And this question is really aimed at revealing people's gut feeling, you know, onderbuikgevoel, because a lot of times members of a data project team will have this gut feeling, but won't be explicit about it, or won't be able to pinpoint where this feeling is coming from. So this question is really meant to bring these gut feelings onto the table, to make them explicit, to discuss them together, and to make some decisions about them. Do we decide that this is a serious concern, and do we mitigate this problem? Or, you know, maybe after having talked about it, it proves not to be as big of a problem as it might have felt like. Second question is, will the results of the analysis be evaluated by a human before being implemented? So this question is really about automated decision making, and if there's a human in the loop. You know, will you, for instance, when you get this list of children with a high risk of leaving school early, will you first include their mentor, for instance, of the school, and ask them, you know, what's your view on this student? Do you agree with the results of this project, or do you see something different? So I think that's a really important aspect as well. And the third question we would like to discuss is there a risk that the project could contribute to discrimination against certain people or groups? And I think, Mirko, you must have something to add on this question, because we talked about the stigmatization before.
Sure. One thing that became apparent is that maybe single parent families are targeted more than others, so people with a migratory background. And as I mentioned in the chat, this is not a fictive project. This is a real project that is implemented in a number of Dutch municipalities. And what we hear from those municipalities is that the project is actually received very well, also by the families who make part of the risk population, because several report that they feel that they are more supported in their efforts to bring their kids to school, to keep them motivated or motivate them, or actually to have someone else who appears, who adds to the strictness of sending someone regularly to school. However, that said, the question the municipality might ask here is, how do I approach the people in this demographic? If the demographic is, for instance, mostly single-parent families, then you might think of additional problems that play a role here. And you might think, how can I actually help this population to tackle these problems? Or if you have to deal with a certain group of youth, who is a credible messenger to speak about the importance of having a school diploma at the end of your school career? Is it wise to send another white guy that reproduces the notion of a top-down municipality? Or do you find more credible and more appropriate messengers to connect to the people who are actually struggling through school here? So those are questions that come up. Also, the question about communication that we had earlier, you already know who's in your risk population. So imagine something goes wrong, then your protocol for leaked data, which is mandatory, is not sufficient. You already know who might be suffering from a potential data loss. So you actually can have a strategy at the ready and respond immediately to the people whose data might be lost. Such things are part of the DETA deliberation process, not only of coming up with all the possible things that can go wrong, but also come up with how actually can we act appropriately? How can we implement extra safeguards for vulnerable demographics and so forth? Maybe you should go to questions, Iris. Maybe people have questions. I really don't know. Shall we take those or first questions?
We have a question from Roel Dobbe, who says applying prediction models for automating or informing sensitive decision-making is inherently scientific. In most situations, organizations are experimenting with little knowledge or examples of how to do something in a correct and safe manner. In addition to asking critical questions, this requires defining clear operational metrics that will track the success and potential implications of the system. And how does the DETA address the need for defining metrics for safeguarding a system?
Well, Roel, thank you so much for your question. Thank you for being here. We watched the great work you guys are doing at AI Now. So there are several things. DETA is not a standalone process, but what DETA does is it provides the basic ground for accountability. It makes the deliberation process transparent and documentable. So in case of algorithms that are acquired, that are bought by a municipality, you can also go to what's actually discussed right now in the parallel session, to rules about procurement. So what are the conditions that we use for procuring algorithms, and how do we test them, and how do we delegate responsibility for the algorithms that we implement? And then I wouldn't underestimate the knowledge that is actually, and the expertise that is present in municipalities, especially the larger ones in the Netherlands, who have absolutely capable data scientists working for them. So it's not that we deal with organizations that are clueless. That would be a gross misrepresentation of the bureaucratic apparatus in the Netherlands. So transparency and clear rules about what are we going to implement under which conditions and who's responsible is the way that DETA would here propose. I don't know whether that answers your question sufficiently, but maybe you can weigh in, Roel.
Roel says, thank you, Mirko. Great. Thanks, Roel. So I would like to add something to. There's been a question in the comments from Ed Parks. How do you find that organizations deal with the process highlighting unethical organizational choices more broadly? Lots of the time, data ethics is just about organizational ethics or lack of it. And Mirko already answered that question within the chat, but I would like to add something there because this is something that we really encounter, especially with when working with commercial organizations. So most of the time we use DETA with government organizations because they have such explicit values already. They often have a value document or a vision document in which their organizational values are very clearly described. I mean, every civil servant has to take an oath, pledge an oath to be a good, responsible civil servant. And obviously in commercial organizations, the situation is a little bit different because those values that the organization may have may not be as explicitly defined or may not even be defined at all. So obviously profit maximization is the core of a commercial organization. There's nothing wrong with that, but we see that when doing or when using DETA, it is very important to have those organizational values clear. So we're kind of experimenting still how to help organizations, commercial organizations, with DETA. So
this relates very much to another question in the chat, Iris. Philip just asks, DETA requires the explication of values. Do you have recommendations for how to develop, structure, present these values in a way compatible with DETA? And as Iris said, the biggest problem is the difference between the municipalities and the corporations. No, it's not a problem. It's what's apparent for us. We notice there is a difference. Most municipalities, of course, have very clear set of values which are represented in the College Accord, in the coalition agreement they have set up. They have a list of values they can actually choose from, which is provided by the Association of Dutch Municipalities. Every municipal employee, of course, swear an oath of his office. They have clear codes of conduct and such forth. So values are much more present there. What we do in a DETA session, Philip, is in the beginning, we make that explicit. We speak with them about the value, also because we want to integrate the values of the participants, their personal values, which differ too. With companies, the problem is, as Iris already indicated, much larger. Many companies have a great, flashy presentation about how they're going to save the world and make the world a better place together with their customers. And then it goes to the beef, to the heart of things. And we had one interesting workshop I might use as an anecdote with a company from the telecom sector, and they were approached by a third party to use an algorithm, an artificial intelligence-driven system to manage their call center. The idea was that the software is able to connect the caller to an appropriate call center agent. They would match on the basis of whatever set of criteria. And the third party said that helps you to sell more things, and we will only get paid if you sell more things. And they were really excited about that proposal. But then they noticed their call center had actually the role to help the customers, not to sell them additional goods, but just to help them with the problems they had with the products and services they already had purchased. So actually, after making the DETA, they decided maybe it's not a good match because the third party drives on selling additional services and products to our clients, while our call center actually has the purpose and the intended value of answering their questions and helping them to get along with the services and products they already purchased.
Yeah, so we are thinking about when we do these sessions at corporations to maybe include a session beforehand, like a session 0, you might call it, which is focused solely on making values explicit. So to really dive into that and include some high-level employees as well. Just first focus on defining those values, making them explicit, and then once you have done that, you can go into the DETA process. But yeah, we noticed that at government organizations this is a lot easier because they already have these explicit values. I see a thumbs up from Philip, so I guess that answered his questions. Good.
So maybe if the floor is open for comments or questions.
Yeah, have we already given them our takeaways yet or not?
They were on the slide. I pull it up
yeah.
again, but I think it became quite clear throughout the session. But maybe if someone indicates additional.
Yeah, so for us to kind of summarize, for us, ethical data projects really have to do with values. So incorporating organizational values within your data project, really making sure they are represented. And this makes data not just a data science issue, but also a policy issue, management issue, a societal issue. What we often see in organizations which can hinder the ethical implementation of data projects is a lack of operational capacity. So more knowledge and skills are needed, not just about data ethics, but also about data in general.
Well, I would like to add something to that because we're doing that for a number of years now. Iris and I are almost weekly at a different municipality and speak to many people from public management. And Iris, as the manager of our DETA team, carries most of the DETA workshops. So what we noticed is DETA is really helpful for, and many municipal employees call us and ask for the DETA workshops because actually they are working with, they are doing political labor, not necessarily having a mandate for. They see in their daily work that data have the qualities that we describe and that they need these guidelines to be responsible for it. But what we actually think that is really lacking is the role of council members, of those who actually are representative for the voting population and should ensure that all these public values are safeguarded in the so-called digital transition. And DETA makes it possible to build the ground for that by providing the documentation that is necessary to speak about data projects. But I think there's another step, and that's something we're really aiming at in the coming year. We're starting, we already did a start with that, to include more actively the council members at a municipality level, to make them aware of the political side of data, because in our opinion, actually any political party should have a statement on digitization, on the digital society we want to live in, because the choices are as broad also for the digital realm as they are for the world we lived in throughout the 20th century.
Okay, great addition, Mirko. Thank you. I don't see any more questions in the chat, so let's give people just a couple more seconds to formulate their questions and ask them to us in the chat. And otherwise, we will close this off. I see it's 5 to 12, so we've done good time management, Mirko. I'm proud of us. A last question from Philip. Thank you for a great session. Last question from me. We're about to emigrate from London to Utrecht. Perhaps I can ping you for a coffee sometime. I would love to involve UDS in a data-intensive eco-agri-food project with global ambition. That sounds very interesting, Philip. And yeah, of course you can drop by. Our office is located right in the center of Utrecht at the Drift, which is at Janskerkhof. Yeah, so send us a message and you're welcome to drop by. Yeah.
Well, thank you all. I did our email address into the chat, so you can reach out to us if you want to learn more about it. To us, DETA is a research project, but it is actually a working tool. So companies like Verdonk, Klooster and Associates and the Association of Dutch Municipalities are using it on a professional basis. But we are very eager to use it more for our own data gathering and insights into organizations. So if you're part of such an organization, you wanted to work with us, don't be shy, reach out. We'll be happy to talk to you.